In the year AD 793, a group of raiders appeared off the east coast of England. These were not ordinary invaders. They were Vikings, fierce warriors from the north who had terrorized Europe for centuries. Their first recorded attack on Lindisfarne, known as Holy Island, marked a turning point in European history. They slaughtered monks, looted treasures, and vanished back across the Dark Sea, leaving behind a traumatized Europe. This event was the first of many brutal encounters between the Vikings and Western Europe, sparking an era of fear that would last for nearly 3 centuries. The Vikings were not just pirates, they were masters of seamanship, unparalleled navigators, and ruthless in their pursuit of wealth and power. Their long ships, swift and versatile, allowed them to strike at will, exploiting the element of surprise. These Scandinavian warriors, hailing from modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, ventured far beyond their homelands, raiding, extorting, and eventually settling in regions across Europe, Russia, and even the Mediterranean. They dared to attack Constantinople, which they called Mecklegard, the great city. But what made the Vikings so dangerous was not just their physical prowess, it was their mindset, a lethal combination of fearlessness, dark humor, and a unique approach to death. The Viking mindset was unlike any other warrior culture of its time. While the Anglo-Saxons, Franks, and other contemporaries also had strong warrior traditions, the Vikings possessed an almost otherworldly disregard for death. This mindset is vividly captured in the sagas, epic tales with written Old Norse that recount the lives, battles, and deaths of legendary Viking heroes. Though often viewed with skepticism due to their blend of history, folklore, and outright fiction, these sagas offer a window into the Viking psyche. The true essence of the Viking mindset is best captured not through modern interpretations, but through their own stories. The sagas, though these narratives were penned centuries later, often in the far reaches of Iceland, they provide a window into a unique and consistent Viking attitude toward life, death, and humor. The Vikings were captivated by death scenes and last stands, often showcasing a brutal, unapologetic sense of humor, a grim wit that laughed in the face of even the most desperate circumstances. To understand what made the Vikings truly formidable, one must dive into these tales of death, defiance, and dark humor, where every word echoes the dangerous spirit of people that are unafraid of their own fate. 1. Ragnar Lodbrok, the Defiant death of a legendary Viking. One of the most famous figures in Viking lore is Ragnar Lodbrok, a legendary hero whose life and death epitomize the Viking spirit. According to a saga, Ragnar was a dragon slayer and a son of a Swedish king. He was a larger-than-life figure who sought fame and fortune through daring raids across Europe. However, his greatest adventure ended in tragedy when he was shipwrecked off the coast of Northumbria, captured by the Christian King Olaf, and condemned to a gruesome death. Ragnar's death in a pit of venomous snakes is one of the most iconic scenes in Viking lore. As he faced his execution, Ragnar mocked his captors with a darkly humorous line, Nija mundu gusir, ef galter hag vesi. Translated loosely, this means the piggies would grunt if they know how the old boar died. The phrase was more than a taunt. You can basically understand it in modern-day language equal to go oink oink.
It was a joke and at the same time a warning that his sons would come seeking revenge. It exemplified the Viking tendency to use humor as a weapon, even in the face of death. Ragnar's joke was on King Olaf, for he knew his sons would not let his death go unavenged.
While the historical accuracy of Ragnar's death is debated, with many suggesting it was a later invention to motivate the invasion of England, his sons known collectively as the Ragnarsons were very real. In 865, they landed in England with a great army, rampaging across East Anglia and Northumbria, ultimately killing King Ella in brutal retribution. This story highlights a crucial aspect of the Viking mindset. Death was not feared, but embraced, and even in their final moments, they sought to leave an indelible mark through wit, defiance, and vengeance. 2. Hrolf-Kraki, the tragic end of a Viking king. Another legendary figure whose death illustrates the Viking mindset is Hrolf-Kraki, a great Danish king often compared to King Arthur of Britain. Hrolf ruled during the 6th century, a time of great upheaval in Europe, and his saga tells of his heroic deeds and tragic downfall. Hrolf's great hall stood near Ligier, where he hosted a famous band of champions, much like Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. However, his own cousin, Hjorvard, betrayed him, launching a surprise dawn attack that left Hrolf and his warriors dead in a desperate last stand. Only one man survived, Voger, the weakest member of Hrolf's court, who had been the butt of many jokes but had sworn to avenge his king, Hjorvard. Now the new king made the fatal mistake of demanding Voger's allegiance and handed him his sword. Voger, true to his Viking nature, seized the opportunity and killed Hjorvard with the very sword he was meant to pledge loyalty upon. Though Voger was immediately executed, his act of defiance fulfilled his vow, turning the tables in a final ironic twist. This story encapsulates the Viking love for dark humor and turning dire situations into moments of grim satisfaction. Voger's death was more than an act of vengeance. It was a final joke at his enemy's expense. The Vikings valued wit as much as they did bravery, and their sagas are filled with much moments where even the weakest among them could seize victory, if only for a fleeting moment. 3. The Jomsvikings. Defiance in the face of death. The Jomsvikings were a legendary band of Viking mercenaries, bound by a strict code of honor and renowned for their fearlessness. According to the sagas, they had a fortified base on the Baltic coast and were often recruited for dangerous missions. In 986, they were called upon the King of Denmark to subdue Jarl Hakon of Lade. However, at the Battle of Hjornavegar, the Jomsvikings were defeated and many were captured facing execution. The saga recounts how the Jomsvikings were their death with defiant humor, refusing to show fear even in their final moments. One prisoner insisted on standing to be beheaded from the front, so people could see that he did not flinch nor fear death. Another, concerned about getting blood on his hair, asked for his hair to be held out of the way, only to jerk his head back at the last moment, causing the axe to sever the hands of the man holding it. This cruel joke, though costing lives, so impressed Jarl Erik, the victorious leader, that who spared the remaining Jomsvikings. Although these tales are totally pure fiction, archaeological evidence has lent some credibility to them. A mass grave discovered near the supposed site of the battle revealed dozens of decapitated skeletons, many showing signs of having been beheaded from the front, just as described in the sagas. This blend of historical fact and narrative fiction underscores the Vikings' unique relationship with death. They faced it with humor, bravado, and a refusal to be cowed. 4. Olaf Haraldsson, the Viking king who became a saint. Before he became a Christian king and Norway's patron saint, Olaf Haraldsson was a feared Viking warrior. His saga paints a picture of a man who straddled the line between pagan warrior and Christian ruler, embodying the transitional period of the Viking Age. In 1029, Olaf was driven into exile by Danish forces and local jarls, who sought to reclaim Norway from his Christian rule. When Olaf returned a year later to fight for his throne, he found himself facing a vast army of hostile pagan farmers. On the morning of battle, Olaf's mood was restless and he asked his poet Thermod to sing to pass the time. Thermod chose a song that was both fitting and foreboding. The Bjarkamal, a poem traditionally sung before the last stand of King Harald, describing warriors rising to face certain death. The choice of song, which predicted the doom of Olaf and his men, would have seemed a poor moral booster to most, but the Vikings reveled in it. They saw honor in embracing their fate with defiance, a hallmark of the Viking attitude. The battle ended as the poem predicted. King Olaf was killed, his bodyguard slaughtered, and only Thermod, the poet, survived. As he lamented his inability to join his king in death, a stray arrow found him, seemingly sent by the fallen Olaf himself to fulfill his wish. Thermod died composing his own death poem, though he did not finish the last line. A bystander, a teenage Harald, Hardrada, completed it for him. This moment captured the Viking spirit perfectly. A warrior's end was not only a chance to meet death, but also to make it memorable. 5. Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking. Harald Hardrada, whose name means the hard ruler, was one of the last great Viking kings. His life was a testament to the Viking spirit, filled with adventure, conquest, and unrelenting ambition. After serving as a mercenary and commander of the elite Varangian Guard in Constantinople, Harald returned to Norway, where he became king and set his sights on greater conquests, including the English throne. In 1066, Harald launched an invasion of England, landing with a formidable force. However, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, his army was caught off guard by the rapid advance of the English king, Harold Godwinson. The Vikings, unprepared and without their armor, faced a heavily armed English force under the blazing sun. Despite the dire situation, Harald charged into battle, leading his men with sword in hand, even composing poetry amidst the fighting, a testament to his warrior's pride. Harald fought fiercely but ultimately fell to an English arrow. His death marked not just the end of his life, but also the end of the Viking Age. The surviving Vikings retreated, and the English allowed them to return home. Yet, even in defeat, Harald's legacy endured. He died like a true Viking, fighting defiant and unyielding. His story is a fitting conclusion to an era defined by fearless warriors, whose attitudes toward life and death made them some of history's most dangerous opponents. For nearly 3 centuries, the Viking terrorized Europe, their long ships cutting through the seas like arrows. But it was not just their raids, battles, or conquest that made them feared. It was their unbreakable spirit and their unique approach to life and death. The Viking mindset, embracing death with humor, turning dire situations into moments of grim defiance, and mocking their enemies even in their final breaths, set them apart from all other warrior cultures. The Viking Age officially ended with the defeat of Harald Hardrada at Stamford Bridge. But the legacy of these fierce Norsemen lived on. They left an indelible mark on European history, from the Norman conquest led by the Viking-descended William the Conqueror to the cultural and genetic imprint they left on the lands they raided and settled. The sagas, though part myth and part history, continue to captivate us, offering glimpses into the lives of people who lived by the sword, laughed in the face of death, and left behind a legacy of fearless adventure. The enduring Viking spirit. The Viking mindset was more than a warrior's bravado. It was a worldview that embraced the inevitability of death with a unique mix of dark humor, defiance, and a relentless will to leave a mark on the world. From the legendary Ragnar Lodbrok's taunts to King Gela, to Harald Hardrada's poetic defiance on the battlefield, the Vikings were defined by their refusal to be cowed by fate. They were not just warriors, they were storytellers, poets, and masters of dark wit, even making their deaths memorable. The Vikings may be long gone, but their spirit lives on in the sagas, in the history books, and in the popular imagination. They were people who knew how to live and die on their own terms, and that made them some of the most dangerous and fascinating figures in history. As the sagas remind us, you can defeat a Viking, but you can never truly conquer their spirit.